The crack of dawn had barely kissed the Montana horizon when Katherine Valenti stepped off the train, her black boots hitting the dust of Whispering Creek for the first time in 5 years. The whispers began immediately, like wildfire through prairie grass, as townsfolk recognized the daughter who had fled west after the infamous Valentine's Day massacre that had claimed her family's ranch and her father's life. "Fool girl," muttered Mrs. Henderson from behind her handkerchief as Catherine walked down Main Street, carpetbag clutched in her gloved hand. Coming back to nothing but heartache and an empty homestead. Catherine kept her chin high, though each whisper stung like a hornet. At 23, she had grown from the terrified 18-year-old who had escaped on the midnight train, tears streaming down her face as she watched flames consume everything she had ever known. She had made a life in San Francisco, working as a schoolteacher, saving every penny. But the letters from Mr. Holloway, her father's old lawyer, had finally convinced her to return. The land was still hers. The Valenti ranch could rise again. "She won't last a week," said the blacksmith to the general store owner as she passed. "That land's cursed now." Catherine gripped her carpetbag tighter. She had heard enough of their doubts in Mr. Holloway's office yesterday after arriving late in the evening. She'd spent the night at the town's only hotel, and now she was heading to what remained of her family's property. "Need a ride out to Valenti land, miss?" called a weathered old man with a wagon. Catherine nodded gratefully. "Yes, thank you." She climbed aboard, arranging her simple blue traveling dress around her. "Mighty brave or mighty foolish," the old man commented as he flicked the reins. "Those Jenkins boys have had their eye on your father's water rights for years. They're saying they bought the claim fair and square while you were gone." Catherine's jaw tightened. "They're lying. My father would never sell to them, and I certainly didn't." The old man just shrugged. "Well, they've been running cattle through that property like they own it. Doubt they'll take kindly to you showing up." An hour later, as they crested the hill overlooking what had once been a prosperous cattle ranch, Catherine felt her heart sink. The charred remains of the main house still stood like a blackened skeleton against the blue sky. The barn was gone entirely. Weeds had overtaken what had once been her mother's garden. Only the bunkhouse remained relatively intact, though its windows were broken and its door hung askew. "Want me to wait?" the old man asked, but Catherine shook her head. "No, thank you. I'll be staying." She paid him and watched as the wagon disappeared down the dusty trail, leaving her alone with ghosts and memories. Catherine stood in the center of what had once been her family's home, the wind whispering through the burned timbers. 5 years ago, the Jenkins brothers had accused her father of stealing cattle. When the marshal had found no evidence, they'd taken matters into their own hands. Catherine had been in town that night, attending a Valentine's social. She'd returned to find her home ablaze, her father's body on the porch with 2 bullet holes in his chest. She had testified against them, but with no witnesses and the Jenkins family's influence, they had walked free. That night she'd fled on the train, terrified they would come for her next. Now she was back, to reclaim what was hers. Catherine walked to the bunkhouse and pushed open the crooked door. It was a mess inside: bottles, trash, signs that various vagrants had used it for shelter over the years. But it had a roof and 4 walls. It would do. She had just begun to sweep the floor clear when she heard the approaching hoofbeats. 3 riders appeared, and Catherine's blood ran cold as she recognized the lead man, Elias Jenkins, the middle brother, who had once asked for her hand and been refused by her father. "Well, look what the wind blew in," Elias called, dismounting his horse. "Little Katherine Valenti, all grown up and back from the big city." Catherine stood in the doorway of the bunkhouse, her broom held like a weapon. "This is still my land, Mr. Jenkins. I have the deed." Elias laughed, a harsh sound that sent birds scattering from a nearby tree. "Deed don't mean nothing out here, girl. We've been running our cattle on this land for years now. It's ours by right of use." "That's not how the law works," Catherine said, her voice steadier than her heart. Law? Elias spat on the ground. Law didn't help your pa, did it? You'd best get back on that train tomorrow. Nothing here for you but 6 feet of earth, you keep pushing. The threat hung in the air as clearly as if he'd drawn his pistol. Catherine gripped the broom tighter. I'm not leaving, she said. Now get off my property. Elias stared at her for a long moment, then climbed back on his horse. You're a fool, Katherine Valenti. Always were. We'll be back, and you won't like what happens then. As they rode away, Catherine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had expected this, but the reality of facing down the men who had murdered her father was different from the scenarios she had rehearsed in her mind. She returned to her sweeping with renewed determination. By nightfall, she had cleared most of the debris from the bunkhouse and made a small corner habitable with her bedroll. In the morning, she would start rebuilding her life. Dawn had barely broken when Catherine woke to the sound of a horse approaching. She reached for the small revolver she kept in her bag, a gift from the woman who had boarded her in San Francisco, and moved cautiously to the window. A lone rider approached, silhouetted against the rising sun. He rode tall in the saddle, and as he drew closer, she could make out broad shoulders and the distinct shape of a cowboy hat. It wasn't one of the Jenkins brothers. This man was taller, his horse a magnificent buckskin, rather than the sorrels the brothers favored. Catherine kept the gun ready as she stepped onto the porch. That's far enough, she called when the rider was within earshot. State your business. The man reined his horse to a stop and raised both hands slightly to show he meant no harm. Name's Ryder Jackson, madam. Heard there was someone out at the old Valenti place. Thought I'd check it wasn't troublemakers. I'm Katherine Valenti. This is my home. She lowered the gun slightly but kept it visible. Ryder Jackson removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair and a face weathered by years in the saddle. He looked to be in his late 20s, with intelligent green eyes that assessed her situation quickly. Miss Valenti? Thomas Valenti's daughter? He seemed genuinely surprised. Word was you'd gone to California. I did. Now I'm back. She straightened her shoulders. Are you working for the Jenkins family? A flash of something anger perhaps crossed Ryder's face. No, madam. I don't work for men like that. I've got a small spread about 5 miles east of here. Your father and mine were friends, back in the day. Catherine tried to recall if her father had ever mentioned a Jackson family, but those memories were from a different life. What do you want, Mr. Jackson? Ryder settled his hat back on his head. Just being neighborly. And I reckon you should know the Jenkins boys were in town last night, drinking and talking big about running you off. I'm not easy to scare, Catherine replied, though her hand tightened on the revolver. A hint of a smile touched Ryder's lips. I can see that. He glanced around at the ruined property. You planning on rebuilding all this yourself? If I have to. Ryder nodded slowly. Brave. Some might call it foolish, but I'd call it brave. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a burlap sack. Brought some coffee and provisions, figuring whoever was out here might need them. Seems I was right. Catherine hesitated, then stepped forward to accept the bag. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Ryder, please. And I could help with that roof, he said, nodding toward the bunkhouse where several shingles had come loose. Won't take but an hour to secure it before the next rain. Catherine wanted to refuse. She had returned to Whispering Creek determined to stand on her own, to prove to everyone and herself that she could reclaim her family's legacy without help. But the practical side of her recognized that some tasks would be impossible alone. I'd be grateful for the help with the roof, she admitted, but I can pay you for your work. I'm not looking for charity. Ryder swung down from his horse, tying the buckskin to a post that still stood near what had once been the corral. Not charity, Miss Valenti, just being a good neighbor, like your pa would have done. For the next few hours, Catherine watched as Ryder efficiently repaired the worst of the roof's damage. He worked with the ease of a man accustomed to making do with limited materials, fashioning replacements for broken shingles from scraps he found in what remained of the barn. While he worked, Catherine cleared more of the bunkhouse and took stock of what she would need to start rebuilding. She had brought her savings enough to purchase supplies and possibly a few head of cattle to start a new herd. But first, she needed the land secure. When Ryder climbed down from the roof, Catherine had a pot of coffee brewing on a small fire outside. "It's not much," she said, offering him a tin cup, "but you're welcome to it." Ryder accepted with a nod of thanks. "Roof'll hold now, at least through spring. Might want to consider a more permanent fix before winter." "I will." Catherine hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "Mr. Jackson Ryder, why are you helping me? You must know what happened here." Ryder's expression darkened. "I know the Jenkins brothers got away with murder because they have half the county officials in their pocket. I know your father was an honest man who didn't deserve what happened to him." He took a sip of coffee. "And I know that land and water rights around here have been getting swallowed up by men like them for too long." "You've had trouble with them too?" "They tried to force my father to sell a few years back. He refused. 2 months later, he had an accident while checking fences." Ryder's voice was matter of fact, but Catherine could hear the pain beneath it. "Can't prove anything, of course, but I know." Catherine felt a kinship with this quiet, capable man who had also lost family to the Jenkins greed. "I'm sorry about your father." Ryder nodded acknowledgement. "Point is, Miss Valenti, folks around here need to see someone stand up to men like that and win. If you're determined to stay, I'd like to help you succeed." "Why would you risk it?" "Because it's the right thing to do." He finished his coffee and stood. "I've got to get back to my own place, but I'll bring by some tools tomorrow. Maybe we can salvage some of the timber from the old house, use it to repair the corral." After Ryder left, Catherine sat on the bunkhouse steps, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains. For the first time since she'd stepped off the train, she felt a flicker of hope. She was still alone in a hostile place, but maybe not entirely without allies. The next morning, she woke before dawn and walked to her father's grave, located on a small rise behind what had been the house. The wooden cross she had hastily erected 5 years ago had weathered but still stood. "I'm back, Pa," she whispered, "and I'm going to make this right." She was clearing away weeds from the grave when she heard riders approaching more than one horse this time. Catherine straightened, her hand going to the small revolver tucked in the pocket of her work skirt. 3 men rode into view, but to her relief, she recognized Ryder at the head of the group. The other 2 were strangers, one older with a salt and pepper beard, the other younger, perhaps around 20. "Morning, Miss Valenti," Ryder called. "Hope you don't mind the company. This is Chester Wilson and his son Martin. They owed me a favor, and I called it in." Chester tipped his hat. "Madam, heard you're looking to rebuild. Brought some tools and know-how." Catherine was momentarily speechless. She had expected Ryder to return as promised, but not with additional help. "That's very kind," she managed finally. "But I can't ask you all to—" "You didn't ask," Ryder interrupted gently. "We're offering. Besides, Chester here has a particular interest in seeing your place restored." The older man nodded. "Used to work for your father, years back. Best boss I ever had. Gave me a loan to start my own place when nobody else would." Catherine vaguely remembered Chester now. He had worked as foreman for a time when she was a child. "Thank you," she said, emotion thickening her voice. "I don't know what to say." "Nothing to say," Chester replied. "Just point us where to start." Over the next week, Catherine's solitary mission transformed into something she hadn't anticipated. Word spread that Ryder Jackson was helping the Valenti girl rebuild, and others began to appear men who had worked for her father, women bringing food and offers to help with sewing new curtains for the bunkhouse windows. Not everyone approved. Catherine overheard whispers when she went into town for supplies. Some still called her a fool, said she was courting disaster by defying the Jenkins family. But there were others who nodded respectfully, who slipped her extra goods when tallying her purchases. Ryder came every day, sometimes staying past sunset to complete a particular task. Catherine found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the careful precision of his hands as he worked, the quiet authority with which he directed the volunteers who came to help. "Why are they listening to you?" she asked him one evening as they sat on the newly rebuilt porch of the bunkhouse, sharing a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. "These men barely know me, yet they're working for free on my land." Ryder considered her question. "It's not just about you, Catherine. It's about what the Jenkins brothers represent. They've been bullying folks around here for years, and most people are too scared to stand against them. You coming back? Refusing to be run off, it gives people hope." "I didn't come back to start a range war," Catherine said quietly. "Sometimes standing up for what's right looks like war to those who've been wrong for too long." Ryder's gaze met hers. "But you didn't answer my question from the other day. Why did you come back? You had a life in California. Safety." Catherine looked out over the land that was slowly being reclaimed from neglect, the newly repaired corral, the foundation being laid for a new barn. "This is my home, my family's legacy. I couldn't let them take it. There's other land, safer places." "It's not just about the land." Catherine's hands tightened around her tin plate. "It's about justice. The Jenkins brothers killed my father and got away with it. If I stayed away, let them have what they wanted. What does that say about the world? That evil wins? That murderers prosper?" Ryder was silent for a long moment. "Your father would be proud of you." The simple statement brought unexpected tears to Catherine's eyes. She blinked them away quickly. "I hope so." 2 weeks after Catherine's return to Whispering Creek, she and Ryder rode into town together to purchase additional supplies. The new barn was nearly complete, and they needed materials to begin rebuilding the main house, a smaller, more modest version than the original, but a proper home nonetheless. As they tied their horses outside the general store, Catherine noticed the sudden hush that fell over the busy street. Following the townsfolk's gaze, she saw 3 riders approaching from the south end of town, the Jenkins brothers. Ryder moved slightly closer to her side. "We can come back another day," he said quietly. Catherine squared her shoulders. "No, I won't be chased away." They entered the store as the Jenkins brothers dismounted outside the saloon across the street. Catherine could feel eyes on her as she handed her supply list to the shopkeeper, Mr. Green. "Quite an order, Miss Valenti," Green commented, eyeing the extensive list. "Rebuilding in earnest, I see." "Yes, Mr. Green. I'll need it all delivered tomorrow if possible." The shopkeeper glanced nervously toward the window. "Well now, I'm not sure I can spare the wagon tomorrow. Perhaps next week?" "I'll pay extra for prompt delivery," Catherine said firmly, understanding his reluctance had nothing to do with wagon availability and everything to do with fear of the Jenkins family. Green hesitated, looking between Catherine and Ryder. "It's not that simple, Miss Valenti. I've got a business to protect, a family to feed." Ryder stepped forward. "Mr. Green, I'll personally guarantee the safety of your wagon and your driver. My word on it." The tension in the store was palpable as Green considered the offer. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. Tomorrow afternoon, but I'll need payment in advance." Catherine counted out the required amount, plus extra for the expedited delivery. As she and Ryder exited the store, she whispered, "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he murmured back. "We've still got to get past them." The Jenkins brothers had positioned themselves in front of the saloon, effectively blocking the route back to the horses. Catherine felt her heart rate increase, but kept her pace steady as she and Ryder walked down the boardwalk. "Well, look here," Elias Jenkins called as they approached. "The Valenti girl and her new guard dog." The other brothers, Walter, the eldest, and Frank, the youngest, flanked Elias like bookends, their hands resting near their holstered pistols. "We're just passing through, Jenkins," Ryder said evenly. "No need for trouble." Walter Jenkins spat tobacco juice onto the dirt. "Heard you're helping rebuild that burned-out shack, Jackson. Wouldn't have figured you for such a fool." "I make my own decisions about where I spend my time," Ryder replied. "Now, if you'll excuse us." Elias stepped forward, blocking their path. "You know, Catherine, I'm still willing to buy that worthless plot off your hands. Save you the trouble of rebuilding just to see it all come down again." The threat was thinly veiled. Catherine felt anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "My land isn't for sale, Mr. Jenkins. Not now, not ever." "Stubborn as your father," Elias sneered. "Look where it got him." Ryder moved slightly, placing himself more firmly between Catherine and Elias. "That's enough, Jenkins. The lady has made her position clear." The two men stared at each other, the tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. Catherine held her breath, acutely aware that half the town was watching from doorways and windows. Finally, Elias stepped back with a mocking smile. "Have it your way for now. But accidents happen out on isolated ranches. Terrible accidents." "Is that a threat, Mr. Jenkins?" Catherine asked, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed street. "Just an observation, Miss Valenti. Just an observation." As they walked past, Frank Jenkins muttered something under his breath that made his brothers laugh. Catherine didn't catch the words, but the malice behind them was clear enough. Once they were safely on their horses and heading out of town, Catherine released a shaky breath. That could have gone worse. Ryder's expression was grim. "It's just beginning, Catherine. They won't let this go." "Neither will I." That night, after Ryder had returned to his own ranch, Catherine sat alone in the bunkhouse, cleaning her father's old rifle by lamplight. The confrontation in town had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Elias Jenkins's words echoed in her mind. Accidents happen out on isolated ranches. She knew she should be afraid. A sensible woman would sell the land and leave, start fresh somewhere safe. But each day spent rebuilding, each memory reclaimed from the ashes, strengthened her resolve. This land was worth fighting for, worth dying for, if it came to that. A soft knock at the door startled her. Catherine grabbed the rifle and moved cautiously to the window. Relief flooded through her when she saw Ryder's familiar silhouette in the moonlight. She opened the door, confusion replacing relief. "Ryder? Is something wrong?" He looked troubled, his usually calm demeanor disrupted. "I rode by the Jenkins place on my way home. There was a lot of activity, men saddling horses, loading rifles." Catherine's stomach tightened. "You think they're coming here tonight?" "I can't be sure, but I wouldn't put it past them after today." Ryder glanced at the rifle in her hands. "I didn't want you to be alone, just in case." The simple statement warmed something in Catherine's chest despite the danger. "Thank you." Ryder stepped inside, removing his hat. "I brought some extra ammunition and another revolver, if you know how to use it." "I've learned." Catherine set her father's rifle aside. "The woman I boarded with in San Francisco believed ladies should be able to protect themselves. She taught me to shoot." A hint of a smile touched Ryder's lips. Smart woman. They spent the next hour securing the bunkhouse as best they could, moving furniture to create defensive positions, extinguishing lamps to prevent silhouettes, and preparing for a potential attack. As midnight approached with no sign of trouble, Catherine made coffee and they sat near the window, taking turns watching the moonlit property. "Tell me about San Francisco," Ryder said during a lull in their vigilance. "What was it like?" Catherine thought back to the crowded city streets, so different from the open spaces of Montana. Busy, noisy, full of people rushing everywhere and never really looking at each other. She smiled faintly. But beautiful too. In its way. The bay at sunset, the fog rolling in over the hills. Did you like teaching? I did. The children were wonderful. Catherine's smile faded. But I always felt temporary, like I was just passing through someone else's life. Ryder nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. And now? Now I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do. Catherine met his gaze. Even with everything that's happened, I don't regret coming back. I'm glad you did, Ryder said softly. The simple statement hung between them, filled with meanings neither was ready to articulate. Catherine found herself studying his face in the dim moonlight, the strong line of his jaw, the kindness in his eyes that belied the hardness of his life. A sudden noise outside broke the moment. They both tensed, reaching for weapons. Back door, Ryder whispered, moving silently across the room. Catherine positioned herself by the front window, rifle ready. The sound came again, a scraping, like boots on gravel. Then a low whistle, followed by hushed voices. Through the window, Catherine could make out at least 3 figures moving toward the bunkhouse. The moonlight glinted off metal gun barrels. They're here, she whispered to Ryder. He nodded grimly. I count 5, maybe 6. Catherine's mouth went dry. Even with both of them armed, those were terrible odds. What do we do? Before Ryder could answer, a voice called from the darkness. Jackson! We know you're in there with the Valenti woman. Come on out and nobody needs to get hurt. Elias Jenkins. Catherine's hands tightened on her rifle. You're trespassing on private property. Jenkins, Ryder called back. I suggest you leave while you still can. A harsh laugh answered him. 2 against 6, Jackson. Those aren't odds I'd bet on. All we want is the woman. She's leaving tonight, one way or another. Catherine moved closer to Ryder. I won't go with them, she whispered fiercely. I know. His hand briefly touched hers. And I won't let them take you. Outside, the tension was mounting. Catherine could hear the men spreading out, surrounding the bunkhouse. They were running out of options. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the night hoofbeats, approaching fast from the east. Multiple riders, moving at speed. What the hell? One of the Jenkins men exclaimed. The new arrivals thundered into the yard, at least a dozen horsemen. Catherine strained to see through the window and gasped when she recognized Chester Wilson at the lead, along with several other men who had helped rebuild her barn. Jenkins! Chester's voice rang out. Your boys might want to reconsider your current position. A tense silence followed. Catherine could imagine Elias Jenkins calculating the new odds 6 against more than a dozen. Finally, Elias's voice came again, the arrogance tempered with caution. This doesn't concern you, Wilson. When you threaten my friends, it concerns me, Chester replied. And when you try to steal land that rightfully belongs to Thomas Valenti's daughter, it concerns everyone who believes in justice. More silence. Then the sound of retreating footsteps, followed by horses being mounted. This isn't over, Elias called as a parting shot. No, Chester agreed, but tonight is. Ride away while you still can. Only when the sound of the Jenkins gang had faded into the distance did Catherine allow herself to exhale. She and Ryder stepped out onto the porch to greet their rescuers. How did you know? Ryder asked Chester. The older man dismounted. Martin overheard them planning in the saloon, said they were going to scare the Valenti girl so bad she'd leave town for good. He looked at Catherine. Couldn't let that happen, madam. Thank you, Catherine said, emotion thickening her voice. All of you. One by one, the men introduced themselves: ranchers, cowhands, shopkeepers. Men who had known her father, or who had their own reasons to stand against the Jenkins family. Miss Valenti, one man said, stepping forward. I'm Marshall Davis. I own the mill outside town. I want you to know you're not alone in this fight. What happened to your father wasn't right, and many of us have stayed silent too long." The unexpected support moved Katherine deeply. She had returned to Whispering Creek believing herself alone in her quest for justice, yet here were men willing to risk their safety to protect her. As the impromptu posse discussed establishing regular patrols of the Valenti property, Katherine found herself standing beside Ryder at the edge of the gathered men. "Did you know this would happen?" she asked quietly. Ryder shook his head. "I hoped someone might come, but this—" He gestured to the gathered men. "This I didn't expect. It changes things." "It does," he agreed. "But the Jenkins brothers won't give up easily. They've got too much pride and too much at stake." Katherine nodded. Understanding the battle was far from over, but for the first time, victory seemed possible. After the men departed, leaving 2 volunteers to stand guard until morning, Katherine and Ryder returned to the bunkhouse. The night's events had left them both keyed up, sleep a distant possibility. "I'll make more coffee," Katherine offered, moving to the small stove. Ryder caught her hand gently. "Katherine." She turned, suddenly very aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his fingers around hers. "Yes?" "I need to tell you something." His expression was serious. "The night your father died, I was out of town, delivering horses to a ranch in Idaho. When I came back and heard what happened, I went to the marshal, told him I'd seen Elias Jenkins threatening your father the week before. But without direct evidence of the murder, it wasn't enough," Katherine finished for him. She had heard the same from the marshal 5 years ago. "No, it wasn't." Ryder's jaw tightened. "I've carried that with me, the knowledge that I could have done more, should have been here." Katherine shook her head. "You couldn't have known what they were planning, and if you had been here, they might have killed you too." "Maybe." Ryder's gaze held hers. "But when I heard you'd come back, I knew this was a second chance to make things right." "Is that the only reason you've been helping me?" Katherine asked, her heart beating faster. Ryder's hand tightened slightly around hers. "No, not the only reason." The admission hung between them, changing the air in the small room. Katherine was acutely aware of everything, the rough texture of his palm against hers, the sound of the wind outside, the way his eyes never left her face. "Ryder, A sudden crack from outside interrupted whatever she had been about to say. They both tensed, years of frontier life making them instantly alert to unexpected sounds. "Stay here," Ryder said, moving to the window. But Katherine was already reaching for her rifle. "I'm coming with you." Together they stepped onto the porch, where one of the men left to guard the property was approaching. "Just a branch breaking," the man reported, all quiet otherwise. They returned to the bunkhouse, the intimate moment broken. Yet something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement that neither could quite retract. "You should try to get some sleep," Ryder suggested. "I'll take first watch." Katherine nodded. Suddenly exhausted now that the immediate danger had passed, she retreated to the small bedroom that had once housed the ranch foreman, while Ryder settled into a chair near the front window. Despite her fatigue, sleep eluded Katherine. Her mind raced with the events of the night, the threat from the Jenkins brothers, the unexpected arrival of allies, and the almost moment with Ryder. What would have happened if they hadn't been interrupted? What had she been about to say? Dawn was breaking when Katherine finally gave up on sleep and joined Ryder in the main room. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening at the sight of her. "You should have woken me to take a turn at watch," she chided gently. "You needed the rest more than I did." Ryder stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of sitting. "Coffee's still warm." As they shared the morning's first cup, a comfortable silence settled between them. Outside, birds began their dawn chorus, a reminder that life continued regardless of human conflicts. "What happens now?" Katherine asked finally. Ryder considered her question. The Jenkins brothers will be angry, humiliated. That makes them dangerous. But we have allies now. We do, he agreed. And that might be enough to make them think twice about direct confrontation. But they'll try other methods, legal challenges to your ownership, pressure on the townspeople who support you, maybe even sabotage. Katherine nodded, having expected as much. Then we need to be prepared on all fronts. I'll ride into town today, speak with Mr. Holloway about ensuring your deed is ironclad, and I think it's time to talk to Marshal Thompson again about what happened 5 years ago. The marshal didn't believe me then, Katherine said, bitterness coloring her voice. Why would he now? Because things have changed. More people are willing to stand against the Jenkins family, and... Ryder hesitated. I've been gathering evidence. Statements from people who saw things, were afraid to speak up before. Katherine stared at him. For how long? Since it happened. Ryder met her gaze steadily. I always believed there would come a time when justice could be done. I just didn't know when. The revelation that Ryder had been working toward justice for her father all these years struck Katherine deeply. While she had fled to California, trying to escape the pain, he had stayed, patiently building a case that might never have been heard. Thank you, she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate for what she felt. Over the next few weeks, Whispering Creek witnessed a transformation unlike anything in its brief history. The rebuilding of the Valenti Ranch accelerated as more volunteers joined the effort. A new house rose where the old one had burned, smaller but sturdy and well-crafted. The corral filled with cattle gifts from neighboring ranchers, each contributing what they could spare to help Katherine start a new herd. The Jenkins brothers remained a threat, but a more subdued one. Marshal Thompson, presented with the evidence Ryder had collected, began a new investigation into Thomas Valenti's murder. While no arrests had been made, the increased scrutiny forced the brothers to tread carefully. Throughout it all, Ryder remained by Katherine's side, advising, supporting, gradually becoming indispensable to her plans and her daily life. They fell into a comfortable routine, working side by side during the day, sharing meals and conversation in the evenings. Sometimes he stayed late, reluctant to leave as the night deepened around them. Sometimes Katherine found reasons to delay his departure, not yet ready to face the solitude of her rebuilt home. Neither spoke directly of what was growing between them, but others saw it clearly enough. Chester Wilson commented on it one afternoon as he and Ryder mended fences along the eastern boundary of the Valenti property. You and Miss Valenti, the older man began, reckon you're courting yet, or still dancing around it? Ryder's hammer missed the nail, nearly striking his thumb. I don't know what you're talking about, Chester. Chester snorted. Course you don't. Just like you don't look at her like she's the sunrise after a long night. Just like she doesn't find reasons to touch your arm when you're talking. Ryder concentrated on hammering the nail correctly this time. It's complicated. Always is, with the good ones. Chester handed him another fence post. But life's too short for complications to get in the way of what matters, son. Take it from a man who's seen too many sunrises alone. Ryder considered the old rancher's words as they continued working. The truth was, he had been in love with Katherine Valenti for years since before she left, when she was still the rancher's beautiful daughter who greeted him with a smile when he delivered horses to her father. He had watched from afar, knowing a horse trainer with nothing to his name had no business aspiring to court Thomas Valenti's educated daughter. Then came the tragedy, her departure, and years of building his own small ranch while quietly gathering evidence against the men responsible. When she returned, something shifted. Katherine was different, stronger, more determined, unafraid to get her hands dirty rebuilding what was lost. And the way she looked at him sometimes. That evening, as summer light lingered over the newly rebuilt ranch, Katherine found Ryder on the porch of the main house, staring out at the grazing cattle. Penny for your thoughts, she said, joining him at the railing. Ryder smiled, just admiring the view. Hard to believe how much has changed in a few months. Katherine followed his gaze. Where once there had been charred ruins and neglect, now stood a working ranch modest compared to what her father had built, but growing stronger each day. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said softly. "You're the one who came back when everyone said you were a fool to try," Ryder replied. "I just recognized bravery when I saw it." Katherine turned to face him fully. "Why did you really help me, Ryder? All this time, all this effort, it can't just have been about my father or justice." The directness of her question caught him off guard. Ryder looked down at his hands on the railing, then back to her face, illuminated by the golden light of sunset. "I helped you because I couldn't do otherwise," he said finally, "because from the moment you stepped off that train, determined to reclaim what was yours despite everything, I admired you. And then I came to—" He hesitated, then committed to the truth. "I came to love you." The words hung in the evening air between them. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look away. "I know I don't have much to offer," Ryder continued quickly. "My ranch is small, and I—" Katherine stepped closer, placing her hand over his on the railing. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when I told you I wasn't looking for charity?" Ryder nodded, his voice suddenly failing him. "You said it wasn't charity. It was being a good neighbor." Catherine's lips curved in a gentle smile. "This isn't about what you have or don't have, Ryder. It's about who you are. A man who stands for what's right, who helps rebuild what others try to destroy, who sees bravery instead of foolishness." She moved closer still, her hand rising to rest against his cheek. "I love you too. I think perhaps I began falling the day you fixed my roof and refused payment." Ryder covered her hand with his own, scarcely believing what he was hearing. "Katherine." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they separated, both were smiling, a new understanding between them. "What will people say?" Ryder murmured, half joking. "The fool girl and the cowboy who helped her?" Katherine laughed, a sound of pure joy that carried across the ranch yard. "They'll say he was smart enough to recognize her courage, and she was wise enough to value his heart." As the sun set over the Montana horizon, painting the rebuilt ranch in hues of gold and amber, Katherine and Ryder remained on the porch, planning their future, not just the joining of their lands and herds, but the building of a life together. In Whispering Creek, the story would be told for generations. How Katherine Valenti returned when everyone called her a fool, how Ryder Jackson called her brave instead, and how together they reclaimed not just a ranch, but justice and love in a land that had nearly forgotten both. 5 years later, the Valenti Jackson Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the territory. The main house, once rebuilt from ashes, had been expanded to accommodate a growing family. 3-year-old Thomas, named for Catherine's father, chased his little sister Lily across the yard while their parents watched from the porch. "Hard to believe how far we've come," Ryder said, his arm around his wife's waist. Katherine leaned into him, watching their children play where once there had been only charred ruins. "Sometimes I think about that day I stepped off the train, how everyone whispered I was a fool." "Everyone except me," Ryder reminded her with a smile. "Everyone except you," she agreed, turning to kiss him softly. "You saw what they couldn't, that sometimes what looks like foolishness is actually the bravest thing of all." The Jenkins brothers had finally faced justice 2 years after Catherine's return, when new evidence and testimonies had emerged during Marshall Thompson's investigation. Walter and Frank had fled the territory, but Elias had stood trial and now served time in the territorial prison. Their influence broken, Whispering Creek had flourished, becoming a community where justice and fairness took precedence over intimidation. Catherine served on the town council, while Ryder had been appointed to the position of deputy marshal, helping maintain the peace they had worked so hard to establish. As the children tired of their game and ran toward their parents, Catherine felt a fullness in her heart that once seemed impossible. From the ashes of tragedy had risen not just a rebuilt ranch, but a family, a community renewed, and a love that had begun with a cowboy who looked at a determined woman and saw not foolishness, but courage. "Mama, Papa, look what I found," young Thomas called, holding up a wildflower with the solemn importance only a child can give to such discoveries. As they admired their son's treasure and settled the children for their afternoon nap, Catherine caught Ryder's gaze over their daughter's dark curls so like his own. The look they shared held all the unspoken understanding of years together, of struggles overcome and joy discovered. They had built something remarkable from nothing but determination and love, a legacy that would endure long after the whispers of fool had faded into distant memory, replaced by tales of bravery, justice, and a love that had transformed not just two lives, but an entire community. And in the end, that was worth everything.